Officer David Brennan froze mid-stride, his weathered hand instinctively reaching for Bruno's harness as the massive black bear suddenly planted all four paws and released a bone-chilling growl that echoed through Denver International's baggage claim. The sound wasn't Bruno's usual alert, this was primal terror. Travelers scattered like startled birds, children's screams piercing the air as suitcases toppled from shocked hands, creating a symphony of chaos across the polished terminal floor. Security radios crackled to life, boots pounding against marble as backup rushed toward the scene. David's throat tightened as he watched Bruno's hackles rise. The bear's massive head locked onto a single black suitcase circling Carousel 3, the same desperate whimper escaping Bruno's throat that David had heard only once before, 3 years ago, the night his son Tommy died. "All units to Terminal B," David commanded into his radio, his voice barely steady. What had triggered his therapy bear's protective instincts so violently? And why did every fiber of David's being tell him that whatever lay inside that ordinary-looking suitcase would change everything? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. David Brennan had learned to read pain in the eyes of broken things. At 45, his weathered face carried the weight of 3 tours in Afghanistan, a marriage that crumbled under the pressure of grief, and the devastating loss that had hollowed out his chest 3 years ago. His son Tommy, 16 and full of dreams about joining the Marines like his old man, had been driving home from basketball practice when a drunk driver ran a red light. David was deployed in Kandahar when the call came. He never got to say goodbye. The nightmares started immediately, visions of IEDs exploding under school buses instead of Humvees, his son's voice calling for help from places David couldn't reach. 2 years of therapy, medication that made him feel like he was swimming through fog, and a divorce decree that arrived the same week he was medically discharged. Sarah, his ex-wife, couldn't bear to look at him anymore. "You carry death around like a cologne," she'd said the day she packed her bags. That's when Bruno entered his life. The 4-year-old American black bear had been rescued as a cub from an illegal breeding operation in the Colorado Rockies. His mother had been killed by poachers, leaving him traumatized and alone. The experimental therapy animal program at Denver International was controversial. Critics argued that putting a 280-pound predator in an airport was insane, regardless of training. But Dr. Margaret Chen, the airport's chief veterinarian, had seen something special in Bruno's gentle intelligence and David's desperate need for purpose. "Animals don't judge," Dr. Chen had explained during their first meeting. "They don't care about your mistakes, your failures, or your scars. They just know if you're safe or dangerous. Bruno needs someone who understands loss. You need someone who won't leave." The partnership saved them both. Bruno's presence kept David grounded during panic attacks, his warm bulk a reminder that some things in this world were still worth protecting. In return, David gave Bruno structure, purpose, and the patient love of someone who understood what it meant to lose everything. They worked the early morning shifts together, Bruno's extraordinary sense of smell detecting everything from contraband fruit to concealed weapons. But more than that, Bruno could sense human distress, anxiety, fear, even the chemical changes that preceded medical emergencies. David lived alone in a small apartment 15 minutes from the airport, his disability check and part-time TSA salary barely covering rent and Bruno's specialized diet. His kitchen table held 2 things: a framed photo of Tommy in his high school basketball uniform and a stack of veterinary bills for Bruno's joint supplements. Some nights, when the Colorado wind rattled his windows and the memories pressed too close, David would rest his hand on Bruno's massive shoulder and remember that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning to carry the weight differently. Today, watching Bruno's unprecedented reaction to that innocent-looking suitcase, David felt the familiar chill of intuition that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. Something was terribly wrong. The suitcase sat innocuously on Carousel 3, a standard black hard-shell case that could have belonged to any business traveler. But Bruno's reaction suggested it contained something far more sinister than clothing and toiletries. The bear paced in tight circles, his massive paws padding against the polished floor as he released intermittent whines that made David's skin crawl. It was the same sound Bruno had made the night David's phone rang with news about Tommy. A sound of recognition, of impending loss. What's got him so worked up? Supervisor Jim Patterson approached with the cautious gait of someone who'd never fully trusted the experimental therapy animal program. At 52, Patterson ran Denver International's security with military precision, but the sight of a distressed bear in his terminal made his jaw clench. "Can you control him?" David kept his voice steady despite the anxiety crawling up his throat. "Bruno doesn't react like this without cause." "Something's wrong with that bag." "It's just luggage, Brennan. Probably got some foreign spices or something that's setting him off." Patterson's radio crackled as other security officers reported the situation under control, passengers being rerouted around the carousel. "We'll run it through the X-ray again. Follow standard protocol." But David had learned to trust Bruno's instincts over human assumptions. During their 18 months together, the bear had detected a passenger carrying illegal ivory, found a child who'd wandered away from his family and was hiding in a bathroom stall having a panic attack, and once alerted to a woman suffering the early stages of a heart attack before she even felt symptoms. Bruno didn't make mistakes. "Sir, the bag came in on Flight 447 from Mexico City," Officer Jennifer Walsh reported, consulting her tablet. "Passenger manifest shows it belongs to a Maria Santos, but she never showed up to claim it." "Been sitting there for 3 hours." Patterson frowned. "Any contact information?" "Dead phone number. Address traces to an empty lot in Juarez." Walsh's expression grew troubled. "And, sir, there's something else. Similar unclaimed bags have come through 3 times in the past 2 months. Same flight route? Same fake passenger information." David felt his pulse quicken. In Afghanistan, patterns like this usually meant enemy activity, carefully planned operations designed to slip past security. What happened to the other bags? Claimed by courier services within hours, different companies each time, but they all checked out legally. Walsh pulled up photos on her tablet. "Look familiar?" The images showed identical black suitcases, same brand, same size. David's military training kicked in, recognizing the hallmarks of a sophisticated smuggling operation. "We need to open this one now before whoever's supposed to collect it shows up." "Absolutely not." Patterson's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent his career following rules. "We have protocols for unclaimed baggage. 72-hour hold, then it goes to lost and found processing. I'm not authorizing a search based on your bear's mood." Bruno's agitation intensified, and he began pawing at the carousel mechanism, trying to get closer to the suitcase. His behavior was becoming increasingly desperate, almost frantic. David had seen this level of distress from Bruno only once before, the night Tommy died, when the bear somehow sensed the tragedy hours before the phone call came. "Jim, please." David's voice carried the weight of their 7-year professional relationship. "I've never asked you to bend the rules before. Bruno is telling us something's alive in there." "Alive?" Patterson's skepticism was evident. "It's been sitting here for 3 hours. If there was something living inside, it would be dying," David finished, "which is why we can't wait for protocols." From across the baggage claim area, an elderly woman in a maintenance uniform approached slowly. Sarah Mitchell had been cleaning the airport's floors for over a decade, moving through the terminal like a ghost that most people never noticed. But David had noticed her watching him and Bruno during their patrols, always maintaining a respectful distance but clearly interested in their work. "Excuse me," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who'd spent years breathing in cleaning chemicals. "I couldn't help but overhear. That suitcase. I've seen others like it." Patterson turned his attention to the janitor with barely concealed irritation. "Ma'am, this is a security matter. I'll need you to return to your duties." But Sarah stood her ground with the quiet determination of someone who'd learned to fight for every small victory life offered. "3 months ago, I was cleaning near this same carousel when a bag just like that one came through. Same markings, same size. The man who picked it up, he wasn't right. Nervous, sweating, kept looking around like he was doing something wrong." David felt a chill of recognition. "What made you remember it?" Sarah's weathered hands trembled slightly as she spoke, "Because he looked just like the men who used to hang around the shelters where my grandson Tyler lived before he disappeared." Sarah Mitchell's revelation hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, acrid and impossible to ignore. David studied the elderly woman's face, noting the deep lines etched by years of worry and the way her hands trembled when she mentioned her missing grandson. At 68, Sarah carried herself with the careful dignity of someone who'd learned that survival meant staying invisible, but her eyes held the fierce determination of a grandmother who'd never stopped searching. "Tell me about Tyler," David said gently, ignoring Patterson's impatient sigh. Something in Sarah's story resonated with his own loss, a familiar ache that recognized itself in others. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she spoke about her grandson. "Tyler was 17 when he disappeared 3 years ago. Good boy, honor roll student, but his stepfather—" She paused, old pain flickering across her features. "When Tyler's mother died in that car accident, Greg started drinking more. Tyler came to me with bruises, said he was fine, but I could see he was scared. One day he just vanished. Police said he was a runaway, case closed." David felt Bruno's warm presence beside him. The bear's agitation somewhat calmed by Sarah's voice, but his attention still fixed on the mysterious suitcase. "You think he was taken?" "I know he was." Sarah's conviction was absolute. "Tyler wouldn't just leave without telling me. We were close. After his mother died, I was all he had left who cared about him." She pulled a worn photograph from her pocket, a smiling teenager with kind eyes and Sarah's stubborn chin. "I've been tracking similar disappearances. Young people from broken homes, kids nobody would miss right away." Patterson shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but we can't base security decisions on speculation about missing persons cases." "It's not speculation." Sarah's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 3 years gathering evidence. "I've been watching this airport because it's a hub. People come and go. Cargo moves through without much scrutiny if you know how to work the system. That warehouse district where the courier services are registered, I've been there. Security cameras that don't work. Empty buildings that shouldn't have power but do." David's military instincts sharpened. "You've been investigating this alone? Who else was going to do it?" "Police closed Tyler's case after 2 weeks. Social services said he was 18, free to leave if he wanted. Nobody cared about one more throwaway kid." The bitterness in Sarah's voice was earned through years of bureaucratic indifference. "But I care. And I've seen enough to know that Suitcase isn't carrying textiles." Bruno suddenly lunged toward the carousel, his massive body straining against David's restraining hand. The bear's distress had escalated to panic levels, and he began making a sound David had never heard before, a keening wail that raised goosebumps along his arms. Other animals throughout the airport began responding, service dogs whining, a passenger's cat carrier erupting in yowls, even the therapy fish in the children's area swimming frantically in their tank. "That's not normal animal behavior," Dr. Margaret Chen's voice cut through the chaos as the airport veterinarian approached at a near run. At 58, Dr. Chen had spent 3 decades working with animals in crisis, and her expression reflected deep concern. "David, I need to examine Bruno immediately. This level of distress could trigger a medical emergency." "No sedatives," David said firmly. "Bruno's trying to tell us something important." "Doctor." And Chen knelt beside the bear, her experienced hands checking his vital signs while speaking in the calm tones that had soothed countless frightened animals. "His heart rate is dangerously elevated, David. Whatever's causing this reaction, it's putting him under severe stress." Patterson's radio crackled with an urgent message. "Sir, we've got a problem. 3 black SUVs just pulled up to the passenger pickup area. Occupants haven't gotten out, but they're watching the terminal. Could be nothing, but given the situation..." David felt the familiar chill of impending danger, the same intuition that had kept him alive through 3 combat deployments. "They're here for the Suitcase." "We don't know that," Patterson protested, but his hand moved instinctively toward his radio. Sarah stepped closer to David, her voice urgent. "There's something else you need to know. I followed one of those courier services last month. The warehouse they used. I saw them loading cages into trucks. Small cages, the kind you'd use for..." She paused, the implications too horrible to voice. "Animals," Dr. Chen finished quietly. "Or children." Bruno's distress reached a crescendo and he began clawing at the ground near the carousel, his powerful limbs scraping against the polished floor. The sound echoed through the terminal like fingernails on a chalkboard, making several passengers cover their ears. Patterson made his decision with the swift authority of someone trained to act under pressure. "Walsh, get those SUVs under surveillance. Chen, can you keep the bear stable without sedating him? And Brennan..." He paused, weighing years of protocol against the evidence before his eyes. "You've got 15 minutes to prove your theory before those courier services show up with legitimate paperwork." David felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. 15 minutes to solve a puzzle that had been haunting Sarah for 3 years, to trust an instinct that had failed him the night Tommy died. But as he looked at Bruno's desperate eyes and Sarah's hopeful face, he realized some gambles were worth taking, regardless of the consequences. "Sarah, I need everything you know about those warehouse locations. Dr. Chen, stay with Bruno and monitor his condition. And someone get me a TSA key for that lock." The clock was ticking, and somewhere in the distance David could hear the rumble of approaching engines. The TSA key felt impossibly heavy in David's hands as he approached the black suitcase, each step weighted with the knowledge that his career hung in the balance. Patterson had cleared a perimeter around Carousel 3, positioning security officers to block the view from the terminal's main thoroughfare, while maintaining radio contact with units monitoring the mysterious SUVs outside. The air thrummed with tension as David knelt beside the case, Bruno pressing close against his shoulder, the bear's massive frame trembling with barely contained urgency. "The lock mechanism is standard TSA," Officer Walsh reported, her voice tight with nervous energy. "But there's something else. See those tiny holes drilled along the seam? They're not manufacturing defects." David's blood chilled as he recognized the modification. "Air holes. Someone drilled ventilation holes." He looked up at Dr. Chen, who had gone pale with understanding. "Whatever's inside has been alive for the entire flight." Sarah Mitchell stepped closer, her weathered hands clasped tightly together. "Tyler once told me about a documentary he watched on animal trafficking, how they drug the animals to keep them quiet during transport, drill holes just like that to keep them breathing." Her voice broke slightly. "If my grandson was right about what he suspected..." The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the terminal. David's hands stilled on the latches as Bruno released a low whine that spoke of recognition and grief. "Whatever we find in here..." David said quietly. "We document everything. Sarah, use your phone to record. Dr. Chen, be ready for medical intervention." He lifted the lid. The smell hit them first, a pungent mixture of urine, feces, and something musky and wild that made Bruno rear back on his hind legs with a roar of anguish. Inside the suitcase, nestled in soiled newspapers and shredded cloth, lay 4 small forms that made David's heart stutter in his chest. Bear cubs, no more than 8 weeks old, their eyes barely open, tiny bodies barely moving with shallow, desperate breaths. "Oh my God," Dr. Chen whispered, immediately reaching for the first cub, a female with distinctive markings around her eyes. "They're severely dehydrated, malnourished, and hypothermic. David, these babies are dying." Bruno's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. The massive bear pressed against David's side, releasing a sound that was part whimper, part mourning cry, the same vocalization David had heard the night Tommy died. But now he understood what Bruno had been trying to tell him. The bear could smell these cubs were related to him, could sense their distress and their desperate need for help. Sarah's phone captured everything as David and Dr. Chen worked to lift the cubs from their makeshift prison. 3 were still breathing, though barely. The 4th, a small male with fur that should have been lustrous black but had turned dull with neglect, was already gone. "How long were they in transit?" Dr. Chen asked, her professional calm barely masking the fury in her voice as she examined the survivors. "The flight from Mexico City was 8 hours, Walsh reported. But the routing shows they originated in Bangkok, with stops in Dubai and Mexico City. They could have been in various containers for days." David felt his hands shaking as he held one of the cubs, its tiny body so fragile he feared his own heartbeat might damage it further. The cub's breathing was labored, its small chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow movements that spoke of organs pushed beyond their limits. "Bruno knew," he said quietly. He could smell they were dying. Patterson's radio crackled with an urgent transmission. "Sir, the SUVs are moving." 2 vehicles heading toward Terminal B, one staying put. ETA 3 minutes. The supervisor's face was grim as he processed the implications. "Chen, how long do these cubs have without immediate medical intervention?" "Minutes, maybe an hour at most for the weakest one." Dr. Chen was already reaching for supplies from her emergency kit. "I need to get them to the veterinary facility immediately, start fluid therapy and warming protocols." "But David..." She met his eyes with the honesty of someone who'd delivered too much bad news. "Even with immediate care, they might not make it." Sarah stepped forward, her phone still recording but her grandmother's instincts overriding everything else. "What kind of monster does this to babies?" The question hung in the air like an indictment of humanity itself. Bruno answered with a sound that raised the hair on David's arms, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to come from somewhere primal and protective. The bear's hackles rose as he positioned himself between the cubs and the terminal entrance, his body language shifting from distressed to defensive. "They're here," Patterson announced as footsteps echoed across the terminal floor. 3 individuals approaching, well-dressed, carrying briefcases. They look official. The lead figure was a woman in her early 50s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that spoke of expensive taste and professional authority. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she carried herself with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. Behind her walked 2 men in dark suits, their bearing suggesting either law enforcement or private security. "I'm Dr. Victoria Ashford from the Colorado Wildlife Conservation Foundation," the woman announced, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone used to command. "I understand you've discovered some endangered animals that belong to our research program." David felt Bruno's tension increase as the woman approached. the bear's protective instincts clearly triggered by her presence. "These cubs were found in an illegal shipping container," David replied carefully. "They're evidence in a federal investigation." Dr. Ashford's smile was polished and professional, but something in her eyes made David's military instincts sharpen. "I appreciate your concern, Officer Brennan, but these animals are part of a legitimate conservation breeding program. They were being transported under federal permits for genetic research that could help save their species." She produced a folder of official-looking documents from her briefcase, spreading them across a nearby counter. "As you can see, everything is in order. The Colorado Wildlife Conservation Foundation has full authority to transport these specimens for research purposes." "Doctor?" Chen looked up from where she was administering emergency care to the weakest cub. "These animals have been subjected to horrific conditions. This isn't conservation, it's cruelty." "Unfortunately, conservation work sometimes requires difficult decisions," Dr. Ashford replied smoothly. "The greater good of the species must take precedence over individual comfort. These cubs will contribute to research that could save thousands of their kind." Sarah stepped forward, her phone still capturing everything. "Research? They're babies who can barely breathe. What kind of research requires torturing infants?" Dr. Ashford's composure flickered for just a moment, revealing something cold beneath the professional facade. "I don't expect civilians to understand the complexities of modern conservation science. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to transport these animals to our facility immediately." Bruno's growl deepened, and he moved to block Dr. Ashford's approach to the cubs. The bear's body language was unmistakable. He recognized this woman as a threat. David trusted Bruno's instincts more than any paperwork, no matter how official it looked. "The cubs aren't going anywhere until they're stabilized," David said firmly. "Dr. Chen's assessment takes priority over any transportation schedule." One of Dr. Ashford's companions stepped forward, his hand moving to his jacket in a gesture that made David's combat reflexes engage. "Dr. Ashford has federal authority here. These animals need to be transferred immediately." Patterson's voice cut through the tension. "Everyone needs to calm down. We're following proper protocol, medical assessment first, then legal jurisdiction. No one's taking anything anywhere until we sort this out properly." Dr. Ashford's mask slipped further, revealing frustration and something else: desperation. "Every minute we delay puts these animals at greater risk. My facility has the resources they need to survive." "Your facility?" Sarah's voice was sharp with suspicion. "Where exactly is this facility? I've been researching wildlife organizations in Colorado for 3 years, and I've never heard of the Colorado Wildlife Conservation Foundation." The question hung in the air as Dr. Ashford's companions exchanged glances. Outside, the rumble of more vehicles approaching could be heard through the terminal's glass walls. Bruno's protective stance intensified, and he began making the same desperate sounds that had started this entire crisis. But now David understood. Bruno wasn't just sensing distress. He was recognizing danger, the same way he'd sensed Tommy's accident before the news arrived. Dr. Chen looked up from her emergency treatment, her face pale but determined. "David, I need to get these cubs to intensive care now. Whatever's happening here, these babies can't wait for bureaucracy to sort itself out." As if in response to her words, the weakest cub released a tiny cry that cut through everyone's arguments like a knife through silk. In that moment, all the official paperwork and professional authority in the world meant nothing compared to the simple fact that innocent lives hung in the balance. David made his choice. David's decision crystallized in the sound of that tiny cub's cry, a sound so fragile and desperate it seemed to tear something fundamental in the air around them. Without hesitation, he scooped up the weakest cub, feeling its rapid heartbeat against his palm like a hummingbird's wings. "Dr. Chen, move. We're getting these cubs to your facility now." You're making a serious mistake. Dr. Ashford's voice carried the edge of barely controlled anger. Those animals are federal property, and interfering with their transport is a felony. Bruno positioned himself between Dr. Ashford and the cubs, his massive frame radiating protective fury. The bear's intelligence was evident in how he assessed the threat, not just the woman, but her two companions whose hands had moved suspiciously close to concealed weapons. A low rumble emanated from Bruno's chest, a sound that spoke of evolutionary memory and the willingness to fight to the death for pack members. Patterson's radio erupted with urgent chatter. "Sir, we've got FBI vehicles approaching Terminal B, multiple units, lights, and sirens. ETA 2 minutes. FBI? Dr. Ashford's composure cracked completely, her face paling as she glanced toward the terminal entrance. That's impossible. This is a routine conservation transport. Sarah Mitchell stepped closer to David, her grandmother's instincts in full protection mode. Nothing routine about babies being shipped in suitcases like cargo. Her phone continued recording, capturing Dr. Ashford's increasing agitation and the desperation in the woman's eyes. Dr. Chen had managed to stabilize the strongest cub enough for transport, but the smallest one was failing rapidly. "David, this little one's heartbeat is irregular. He's going into shock from prolonged stress and dehydration. If we don't get him on IV fluids in the next 10 minutes..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. David had seen enough death to recognize its approach, but this time, unlike with Tommy, he had a chance to intervene. The terminal's automatic doors burst open as FBI agents flooded into the baggage claim area, their presence transforming the space from an airport into a crime scene. Agent Lisa Martinez led the team, her badge prominently displayed as she surveyed the situation with the practiced eye of someone who'd worked human trafficking cases for over a decade. "Dr. Victoria Ashford," Agent Martinez announced, her voice carrying federal authority. "You're under arrest for violations of the Endangered Species Act, conspiracy to commit wildlife trafficking, and operating an illegal animal research facility." Dr. Ashford's world collapsed in that moment. The professional facade she'd maintained crumbled as handcuffs clicked around her wrists, her carefully constructed life of legitimacy exposed as an elaborate lie. "You don't understand," she pleaded, her voice breaking with desperation. "My research could save thousands of animals. These cubs were part of a larger conservation effort." "Your conservation effort involves smuggling bear cubs in suitcases," Agent Martinez replied coldly. "We've been tracking your organization for 8 months. The warehouse facilities, the illegal breeding operations, the corruption of shipping manifests, we have everything." Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "Agent Martinez, my grandson Tyler, he disappeared 3 years ago. I think he might be connected to this." Agent Martinez's expression softened slightly. "Ma'am, we've rescued 17 young people from Dr. Ashford's facilities in the past week. If you have a missing persons report, we'll cross-reference it with our recovery list." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She gripped David's arm for support, hope and terror warring in her weathered features. 70. Tyler could be. One of Dr. Ashford's companions broke his silence, his professional composure cracking under federal pressure. "Dr. Ashford told us this was legitimate research. We're just security contractors. We didn't know about any trafficking." "Save it," Agent Martinez replied. "Your employer has been using legitimate conservation cover to operate one of the largest exotic animal trafficking rings in North America. The cubs you're looking at represent about $2 million on the black market." Bruno's agitation reached a fever pitch as more federal agents entered the area. The bear's protective instincts were overwhelming his training, and David could see the signs of an impending panic attack, the same symptoms Bruno displayed during thunderstorms or when separated from David for too long. "I need to get Bruno out of here." David told Agent Martinez. The stress is becoming too much for him. Doctor. Chen looked up from where she was administering emergency glucose to the failing cub. David, this little one just stopped breathing. The words hit the group like a shockwave. David immediately moved to Dr. Chen's side, his military first aid training kicking in as he began gentle chest compressions on the tiny cub. The animal's body was so small, so fragile, that each compression felt like it might cause more harm than good. "Come on, little fighter," David whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't give up now." Sarah began recording again, her phone capturing the desperate attempt to save a life that had already endured too much suffering. "Tyler would have done the same thing," she said softly. "He always tried to save injured animals he found." Bruno pressed close to David, his massive head lowering until his nose almost touched the unconscious cub. The bear made soft, encouraging sounds, the same vocalizations David had heard mother dogs use with their puppies. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the cub's tiny chest began rising and falling again. Dr. Chen quickly administered more fluids, while David continued monitoring the fragile heartbeat. "He's responding," Dr. Chen announced, relief evident in her voice. "But he's not out of danger yet." Agent Martinez watched the rescue effort with professional interest. "Dr. Ashford, care to explain why these cubs were being transported in conditions that nearly killed them?" Dr. Ashford's answer came in broken sentences, her professional authority completely shattered. "The buyers, they wanted young specimens. Cubs adapt better to the conditions they require. The stress of transport was regrettable but necessary for the larger operation." "Buyers?" Sarah's voice was sharp with anger. "You're talking about selling these babies like merchandise." "You don't understand the complexities," Dr. Ashford replied desperately. "The money from these sales funded legitimate research. My daughter, she died from a rare genetic condition that animal-based therapies might have cured. Every dollar went toward developing treatments that could save human lives." The revelation hung in the air like a confession and a justification rolled into one. David looked up from the cub he was helping to stabilize, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Your daughter's death doesn't justify torturing other people's children," he said quietly. "These cubs had mothers, too. Families that were destroyed so you could fund your research." Dr. Ashford's composure completely collapsed. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at the cubs David and Dr. Chen were desperately trying to save. Emma was 8 years old when she died. 8 years old, and the treatments that might have saved her were tied up in regulatory red tape for years. I couldn't wait anymore. I couldn't let other children die while bureaucrats debated ethics. Agent Martinez's voice carried both professional authority and human compassion. "Dr. Ashford, we understand your loss, but the path you chose has caused immeasurable suffering to countless animals and the people who were exploited in your operation." Bruno suddenly lifted his head, his attention focused on the terminal entrance where more vehicles were arriving. His protective stance intensified, and he began making warning sounds that made David's military instincts sharpen. "More arrivals," Patterson reported through his radio. "Looks like media vans. Word's getting out about the situation." Agent Martinez cursed softly. "We need to move this operation before it becomes a circus. Dr. Chen, can you transport the cubs safely?" "The stabilized ones, yes, but this little one," she gestured to the cub David was still monitoring. "He needs constant care. Moving him now could be fatal." David made another split-second decision that would define the rest of his life. "Then we don't move him. Bruno and I stay here until he's strong enough. Agent Martinez, I volunteer to be the federal witness who maintains custody of the evidence." The words carried weight beyond their immediate meaning. David was choosing to risk everything, his job, his future, his carefully rebuilt life, for a creature that might not survive the next hour. Sarah stepped beside him, her phone still recording, her voice steady with newfound purpose. "I'll stay too, as a witness to everything that's happened here." Bruno settled beside David, his massive presence offering protection and comfort to both the human and the tiny cub they were trying to save. In that moment, the strange family they'd formed, a broken veteran, an elderly janitor searching for her grandson, a therapy bear with his own traumatic past, and dying cubs who represented hope for justice, became something more powerful than the sum of their individual parts. The weakest cub died in David's hands at 3:47 p.m., his tiny heart simply giving out after hours of valiant struggle against dehydration, stress, and the cruelty that had defined his short life. David felt the exact moment when the fragile heartbeat stopped, the small body going still against his palm with a finality that transported him instantly back to another hospital room. Another moment when he'd been powerless to save someone he'd grown to love. "No," David whispered, his voice breaking as he continued chest compressions on the lifeless form. "No, no, no. Come back, little fighter. Please come back." Dr. Chen gently placed her hand over David's, stopping his desperate attempts at resuscitation. "He's gone, David. He fought as hard as he could, but the damage was too extensive. He's at peace now." The sound that emerged from Bruno's throat was unlike anything David had ever heard from the bear, a keening wail of grief that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than instinct, somewhere that understood loss in all its devastating finality. The massive bear pressed against David's side, offering the same comfort he'd provided the night Tommy died, but this time they were mourning together. Sarah Mitchell's weathered hands shook as she lowered her phone, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He was just a baby," she whispered. "Just an innocent baby who never hurt anyone." The veterinary facility had become a makeshift intensive care unit, with Dr. Chen working tirelessly to stabilize the two surviving cubs, while David held vigil over the one they'd lost. The small body looked impossibly fragile in the harsh fluorescent lighting, his dark fur dulled by suffering, but his face peaceful in death. Agent Martinez entered the room with the careful footsteps of someone who'd delivered too much bad news in her career. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly, her professional demeanor softening in the presence of such innocent tragedy. "Dr. Chen, how are the other two cubs doing?" "Stable, but critical," Dr. Chen replied without looking up from her work. "The female is responding well to IV fluids, but the male is still touch and go. Another few hours in that suitcase, and we would have lost all of them." David couldn't take his eyes off the deceased cub, his mind cycling through all the moments when intervention might have saved this tiny life. If they'd opened the suitcase sooner, if they'd ignored protocol from the beginning, if Bruno's distress had been taken seriously immediately, the weight of all those missed opportunities pressed down on him like a physical force. "David," Sarah said softly, moving to stand beside him, "you did everything you could. You saved the other two." "It wasn't enough," David replied, his voice hollow with grief. "Just like with Tommy, just like with Ranger, I keep failing the ones who need me most." Bruno lifted his massive head and fixed David with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see straight into his soul. The bear made a soft sound, not quite a whimper, not quite a grunt, that somehow conveyed understanding, forgiveness, and shared sorrow all at once. Agent Martinez cleared her throat gently. "David, there's something you need to know about Dr. Ashford's operation. The 17 young people we rescued, one of them is Tyler Mitchell." Sarah's legs nearly gave out. She gripped the edge of the examination table for support, her face cycling through disbelief, hope, and terror in rapid succession. Tyler? My Tyler? Is he hurt? He's alive and physically unharmed, Agent Martinez assured her quickly. He's been working as a caretaker for the animals at one of Ashford's facilities. According to his statement, he was recruited 3 years ago when he ran away from home. He thought he was helping with legitimate animal rescue work. The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. 3 years of searching, 3 years of sleepless nights and growing despair, and Tyler had been alive the entire time, believing he was doing good work. Where is he? Can I see him? He's being debriefed at the federal building, but we can arrange a reunion once the initial interviews are complete, Agent Martinez replied. Sarah, he's been asking about you constantly since we found him. He never stopped wanting to come home. David looked up from the deceased cub, seeing Sarah's joy and relief despite his own overwhelming grief. Sarah, that's incredible news. Tyler's coming home. But Sarah's grandmother's heart was breaking for David even as it soared with hope for Tyler's return. This little one mattered too, she said firmly, gesturing to the still form in David's hands. His death isn't meaningless just because Tyler's alive. Every innocent life has value. Dr. Chen paused in her work with the surviving cubs. We'll hold a proper memorial service for him. He deserves to be remembered, honored for the fight he put up. Bruno rose slowly and moved to David's other side, his massive frame creating a protective circle around both the living and the dead. The bear's presence seemed to anchor David to the moment, preventing him from drowning completely in the familiar waters of guilt and self-recrimination. He saved the others, David said finally, his voice steadying as he found meaning in the tragedy. His suffering, alerted Bruno, led us to discover the trafficking ring, brought down Ashford's operation. His short life mattered. Through the facility's windows, the Denver sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, marking the end of a day that had changed all their lives forever. 3 days after the cub's death, David sat in the sterile conference room at the FBI field office, staring at a stack of documents that would reshape everything he thought he knew about his life. Agent Martinez sat across from him, her expression a mixture of professional duty and personal compassion as she prepared to deliver revelations that would shatter his understanding of the past 3 years. David, what I'm about to tell you will be difficult to process, Agent Martinez began carefully. Our investigation into Dr. Ashford's operation has uncovered some troubling connections to your personal history. Sarah Mitchell sat beside David, having insisted on being present for whatever revelations were coming. Tyler's reunion with his grandmother had been emotional and healing, but it had also revealed disturbing details about Dr. Ashford's recruitment methods and the scope of her criminal enterprise. Just tell me, David said quietly, his hands clasped tightly together. Bruno lay at his feet, the bear's presence offering the steady comfort that had become David's anchor through every crisis. Agent Martinez opened the first file. Dr. Ashford didn't just run an animal trafficking operation. She was conducting unauthorized psychological experiments on both animals and humans, studying trauma bonding and emotional manipulation. Your partnership with Bruno wasn't coincidental. You were specifically selected as a test subject. The words hit David like a physical blow. What do you mean, selected? Dr. Ashford had been monitoring veterans with severe PTSD, looking for subjects who would form intense emotional bonds with therapy animals. Your file was flagged after Tommy's death because of the severity of your psychological trauma and your background with military working dogs. Sarah's intake of breath was audible. You're saying this woman targeted David specifically? The therapy animal program at Denver International was legitimate, but Dr. Ashford infiltrated it through Dr. Chen's predecessor, Dr. William Hayes. Hayes was accepting payments to provide access to veterans who could serve as unwitting test subjects for Ashford's bonding research. David felt his world tilting on its axis. Was Bruno part of the experiment? Agent Martinez's expression grew even more grave. Bruno was rescued from one of Ashford's breeding facilities, not from wild poachers, as you were told. He was raised in captivity specifically to form attachments with human handlers. His unusual intelligence and emotional sensitivity are the result of selective breeding and conditioning. The revelation shattered something fundamental in David's chest. Every moment of connection with Bruno, every instance of the bear's seemingly intuitive understanding had been manufactured. The relationship that had saved his life, given him purpose and hope, was built on a foundation of scientific manipulation. However, Agent Martinez continued quickly, seeing the devastation in David's eyes, what Dr. Ashford didn't account for was the genuine nature of the bond that developed between you and Bruno. Her notes show increasing frustration that your relationship exceeded her experimental parameters. You both began exhibiting behaviors that couldn't be explained by conditioning alone. Sarah reached over and gripped David's hand. David, listen to what she's saying. What you and Bruno have is real, regardless of how it started. But how can I trust any of it? David's voice was raw with pain. How do I know what's real emotion and what's programmed response? How do I know if Bruno actually cares about me or if he's just following conditioning? Bruno lifted his massive head at the sound of distress in David's voice, moving to rest his chin on David's knee in the same gesture of comfort he'd offered hundreds of times before. The bear's dark eyes held the same intelligence and concern they always had, but now David questioned everything he saw there. Agent Martinez pulled out another file, this one thicker than the first. There's more, David. Dr. Ashford's research extended beyond animal bonding. She was studying inherited trauma responses, and her files contained detailed psychological profiles of multiple generations of families affected by military service. My family? David asked, though he dreaded the answer. Your father's service in Vietnam, your own deployments in Afghanistan, the patterns of PTSD and emotional dysfunction that run through military families. Dr. Ashford believed she could use therapy animals to artificially accelerate healing processes that normally take years or decades. Sarah's voice was tight with anger. She was experimenting on grieving people, on families torn apart by war and loss. The ethical violations are staggering, Agent Martinez agreed. But here's what's important, David. Her own research notes prove that your bond with Bruno transcended her experimental design. She documented instances where Bruno protected you from threats she hadn't programmed him to recognize, where he displayed emotional responses that couldn't be explained by conditioning. David looked down at Bruno, the bear's steady presence a constant in a world that suddenly felt unstable and artificial. The night Tommy died, Bruno knew something was wrong hours before I got the call. How could conditioning explain that? It couldn't, Agent Martinez replied. That's when Dr. Ashford's notes show she began to realize her experiment had created something beyond her control, a genuine emotional bond that operated outside scientific parameters. A new voice entered the conversation as Dr. Chen stepped into the conference room, her face bearing the weight of complicity and regret. David, I need to tell you something I should have revealed years ago. David's heart sank further. You knew about the experiments? Not initially, Dr. Chen said quickly. When Dr. Hayes brought Bruno to the airport program, everything seemed legitimate. But about a year into your partnership, I began noticing inconsistencies in Bruno's background documentation. When I investigated, I discovered Hayes was receiving payments from an outside source. Why didn't you report it? David asked, though his tone held understanding rather than accusation. Dr. Chen's eyes filled with tears. Because Bruno was saving your life. Your transformation from a broken, suicidal veteran to someone with purpose and hope was miraculous. I couldn't bear to destroy something that was helping you heal, even if it had begun under false pretenses. Sarah squeezed David's hand tighter. David, think about what you're hearing. Yes, the circumstances were manipulated, but the healing was real. The love was real, the growth was real. Agent Martinez leaned forward. David, there's one more thing. Dr. Ashford's final notes, written just days before her arrest, contain an admission that her research had failed in its original objectives. She wrote, and I quote, "Subject 7 and Animal 12 have developed an authentic emotional bond that exists independent of programmed parameters. Their relationship represents genuine love transcending artificial origin. My experiment created something I cannot control or replicate. True healing through authentic connection." David sat in silence for long minutes, processing revelations that challenged everything he believed about his recovery and his relationship with Bruno. The bear remained pressed against his leg, offering steady comfort regardless of the scientific implications of their bond. "Dr. Chen," David said finally, "in your professional opinion, setting aside all the experimental aspects, is what Bruno and I have real?" Dr. Chen's response was immediate and certain. "David, I've worked with therapy animals for 30 years. What you and Bruno share transcends any scientific explanation. He chooses to comfort you, protect you, and care for you. Those choices, made daily over 3 years, represent genuine love regardless of how your relationship began." Agent Martinez closed the files. "David, we need your testimony to ensure Dr. Ashford receives the maximum sentence for her crimes. But more than that, your story, the real story of healing and authentic connection despite manipulated circumstances, could help other veterans understand that recovery is possible." David looked at Bruno, the bear's trusting eyes reflecting the same devotion they'd always shown. Slowly, understanding began to replace the devastation in David's heart. "Bruno," he said softly, "did you know we were part of an experiment?" Bruno's response was to press closer against David's leg, making the soft, rumbling sound that meant contentment and security. Whatever scientific intentions had brought them together, the bear's choice to love and protect David was made fresh every day. "The cubs," David said suddenly, looking up at Agent Martinez. "What happens to the 2 survivors?" "They'll be relocated to a legitimate wildlife sanctuary where they can live natural lives," Agent Martinez replied. "But David, they'll never be able to return to the wild. Like Bruno, they'll need human care for the rest of their lives." David's decision crystallized with the clarity that only comes from understanding one's true purpose. "I want to help care for them. Bruno and I, we understand what it means to heal from trauma. Maybe we can help them learn to trust again." Sarah smiled through her tears. "Tyler wants to study veterinary medicine now. Maybe this broken family can help heal other broken families." Outside the conference room windows, Denver's skyline gleamed in the afternoon sunshine, and for the first time in days David felt hope stirring in his chest alongside the grief and confusion. 2 years later, Christmas morning arrived at the Rocky Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary with the gentle persistence of healing itself. David stood on the wraparound porch of the modest house he now called home, watching Bruno play in the snow with Liberty and Hope, the 2 cubs who had survived that terrible day at the airport and grown into magnificent young bears under his and Dr. Chen's care. The sanctuary sprawled across 40 acres of Colorado mountainside, a place where animals who could never return to the wild found purpose in helping others heal. David's role as head of the trauma recovery program had evolved naturally from his work with Bruno, and the facility now hosted veterans, first responders, and civilians struggling with PTSD alongside their animal companions. "David, breakfast is ready," called Dr. Chen, now Margaret, now his wife of 8 months, from the kitchen doorway. Her early retirement from the airport had led to this new chapter where she could focus on the healing relationships between broken souls, both human and animal. Sarah Mitchell emerged from the guest room, moving slowly, but with the determined grace of a woman who had found her purpose at 70. Tyler followed close behind, now a third-year veterinary student who spent his holidays working at the sanctuary. The young man bore little resemblance to the frightened teenager who had been rescued from Dr. Ashford's facility. He had grown into someone who understood that healing often required helping others find their own path to recovery. "Grandma Sarah, you're moving like your arthritis is bothering you again," Tyler observed with the gentle authority of someone studying to be a healer. "Nothing that watching you all together can't cure," Sarah replied, settling into her favorite rocking chair on the porch. "Besides, at my age, I've earned the right to move slowly on Christmas morning." Through the large windows of the common room, they could see other residents of the sanctuary beginning their day. Marcus, a Marine veteran who had lost both legs in Afghanistan, was working with his therapy bear, Courage, on balance exercises. Elena, a firefighter struggling with PTSD after losing her entire crew in a wildfire, sat quietly reading while her companion, a gentle giant named Peace, dozed beside her chair. The sanctuary had become something Dr. Ashford's twisted research could never have anticipated, a place where genuine healing happened through authentic relationships built on choice rather than manipulation. David's testimony at her trial had helped secure a 25-year sentence, and the judge's closing remarks had emphasized that true therapy came from trust freely given, not scientifically manufactured. "I still can't believe how much has changed," Tyler said, watching Bruno teach the younger bears how to fish in the sanctuary's pond. 2 years ago, I thought I was helping with legitimate research. Now I'm studying to become a veterinarian specializing in trauma recovery." Margaret joined them on the porch carrying a tray of hot coffee and homemade cinnamon rolls, a Christmas tradition she had inherited from her grandmother and now shared with their chosen family. "You were helping," she told Tyler gently. "You kept those animals alive and showed them kindness during impossible circumstances. That wasn't wasted effort." David watched Bruno demonstrate patience with Liberty, who was still learning to trust human presence. The massive bear's gentleness with traumatized animals never ceased to amaze him, though he now understood that Bruno's capacity for healing others came from his own experience with recovery. "I got a letter from Agent Martinez yesterday," David announced, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "The last of Dr. Ashford's facilities has been shut down, and all the animals have been relocated to legitimate sanctuaries. They found 16 more bears, 12 wolves, and over 30 other species that will never be exploited again." Sarah rocked slowly in her chair, her weathered hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "Every life saved matters. Even the one we lost that first day. His suffering led to all of this healing." They had named the sanctuary's memorial garden for Justice, the tiny cub whose death had catalyzed everything that followed. The small stone marker read simply, "Justice, whose brief life exposed great wrongs and began great healing." Visitors often left flowers there, understanding that some losses create space for profound transformation. "Speaking of letters," Margaret said with a smile, "we received confirmation that 3 more veterans have been accepted into our spring program. One of them is bringing a rescue dog who survived the same IED explosion that injured his handler." Tyler's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who had found his calling. "I've been researching the latest techniques in animal-assisted PTSD therapy for my senior project. Dr. Harrison thinks our model here could be replicated at facilities across the country." David felt the familiar warmth of purpose that had replaced the hollow ache of his earlier years. Bruno started something bigger than any of us imagined. Even Dr. Ashford's manipulation couldn't destroy the genuine healing that began here. As if summoned by his name, Bruno approached the porch with his characteristic gentle rumble of greeting. The bear had grown grayer around the muzzle in the past 2 years, but his eyes held the same intelligence and devotion that had first captured David's heart. Liberty and hope followed at a respectful distance. They had learned to trust humans again, but their wildness remained intact, carefully nurtured rather than suppressed. "Merry Christmas, buddy," David said, running his hands through Bruno's thick fur. "Thank you for saving us all." Bruno's response was to settle beside David's chair, creating a warm barrier against the mountain cold. Liberty and hope arranged themselves nearby, completing a circle of contentment that spoke to David's military soul, a defensive perimeter built not from weapons and suspicion, but from love and mutual protection. Margaret raised her coffee cup in a toast to families that choose each other, to healing that transcends species, and to the courage to love again after loss. "To second chances," Tyler added, his voice thick with gratitude. "To finding each other when we needed it most," Sarah concluded, her grandmother's wisdom encompassing them all. As the Colorado sun climbed higher over the Rocky Mountains, casting golden light across the sanctuary, David understood that some gifts arrived disguised as tragedies. Bruno's manufactured origins had led to authentic love. Dr. Ashford's cruelty had created a sanctuary for healing. Tommy's death had eventually guided David toward a life spent helping others find their way back from darkness. The family they had built, veteran and widow, student and healer, bears and humans, represented something more powerful than any scientific experiment could achieve. They represented the triumph of chosen love over manipulated circumstance, of hope carefully tended in the soil of shared pain. Outside, snow began to fall gently over the sanctuary, blessing their Christmas morning with the promise of peace. Dear friends, David's story reminds us that it's never too late to find the family your heart has been searching for. At 45, broken by loss and convinced his best years were behind him, David discovered that healing doesn't have an expiration date. Like so many of us who've faced empty nests, retirement uncertainties, or the loss of loved ones, David learned that our greatest chapters often begin when we think the story is over. Sarah, at 68, could have given up searching for Tyler, but her grandmother's heart refused to surrender hope. Margaret found love and purpose in her late 50s, proving that second chances don't diminish with age, they become more precious. Bruno, despite his traumatic past, chose love over fear every single day. Their chosen family, built on shared healing rather than shared blood, shows us that the loneliness so many of us feel isn't permanent. Whether you're caring for aging parents, missing grandchildren who live far away, or wondering if your most meaningful contributions are behind you, remember, David was 47 when he started the sanctuary that would change hundreds of lives. Your next chapter of purpose and belonging is waiting to be written. What unexpected friendship or connection has brought the most healing to your life? Have you ever found family in the most unlikely places? Share your story with us below.